Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. And it is that artwork and that process that is driving this video today and the change to the channel for the weekend. Today is August 29th, 2020. Yesterday on the 28th, the actor and artist Chadwick Boseman, who's most famously known for playing Black Panther in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he passed away yesterday of stage 4 colon cancer. He was 43 years old. 2 weeks ago, I turned 43 years old. And it is a conflux of emotions that I am feeling today. Growing up, I was a DC Comics fan. Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman. I was not a Marvel fan. I didn't read the comics. I didn't watch the TV shows. And when the movies came out, I didn't really see many of them just because I didn't know about the characters. Black Panther was the first Marvel film that I watched that its entire message and story impacted me greatly. The character of King T'Challa and the people of Wakanda, the messages that are just implicit in that entire story is so impactful and resonated with me. It is my favorite Marvel film. It enthusiastically brought me into the series. Chadwick was a great actor and performer. I have a background in theater and film. I wanted to be an actor in Hollywood long ago before my career in photography. He's been in a bunch of different movies, most notably the movie 42, which is a movie about, he portrayed Jackie Robinson, the baseball player. He won a bunch of awards for the film. Just a brilliant, talented individual and artist, and he's dead at 43 years old. He was diagnosed in 2016 with colon cancer and went on to create the biggest blockbusters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. His health and fitness he stayed on top of, and he kept his illness a secret and endured so that his career and legacy and the time that he had left would be spent, I have to imagine, would be spent about the work he was doing as an artist. And people would pay attention to that work and celebrate that and not his struggle with cancer. When things get too loud for me here and in my heart, I turn to creativity. I turn to Photoshop and I create artwork and I edit and I make something, because in that act of doing that, the world gets a little quieter for me, and then I can focus and see my way through the issues or the challenges that are in front of me. And that's what I want to do today. And that's what's driving this. So I had a couple of other videos that were going to go to the channel today and tomorrow, but I'm going to post those for next weekend. There is a separate entity for Reality Reimagined from the YouTube channel. It's a series on education for composites in Photoshop and photography. It teaches you how to do composites, starting with the most basic of changing out a background and a sky, all the way through complex composites of cosplay and fantasy artwork. One of the chapters in that series shows you how to make this piece of artwork. This was created and captured with my wonderful friend Converse Ninja, who is a great cosplayer and a wonderful human being. There are 6 different videos in the series that takes you through the photography all the way through the creation process in Photoshop. And I want to bring those videos from that separate entity to the channel. The composite series has not been marketed, it has not been launched fully. It is not something I'm going to advertise right now. I simply just want to bring this education that centers on this character and this story that's important to me and bring it to all of you. For those who may be hurting today because of the loss of this actor, of this artist, here's a moment for you to be able to hopefully find a sense of peace and creativity. And if it is not that impactful to you, which is totally okay, then it's education for you in a realm of photography and Photoshop that's important to me. It's how Reality Reimagined got its start. And there's a lot of good information in there. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be merging some of the videos together. So today you will see the video that talks a little bit about the introduction of the film, why it's important to me, why it's important to Converse Ninja, how we shared that together. You'll see some of the photography that happened on set and the images that were created because of it. And then I'll take those images into Adobe Camera Raw. And then tomorrow on August 30th, you'll see the video where I take the images through dodging and burning and use the quick selection tool to extract the image, the person from the image, and working with layer masks and so forth. And then on Monday, August 31st, 2020, will be the final video, which is the longest, and that's the world building of putting all the stock and so forth together to create this image, the color grading, the artistic enhancement, and so forth. So these 3 videos, these next 3 days on the channel, will be celebrating that information and that artwork centered on this character that is important to me. Before I launch into that, I'm going to try to weave these videos together. They're already finished. They've already been online. I'm just going to try to edit them together to make the most sense for all of you. I'll do an introduction for tomorrow's video and Monday, so anybody who's dropping by will know what's going on and what it's about. And I want to finish with this. Of all the emotions that I'm feeling right now, he was 43. And he fought a deadly disease. And I cannot imagine the human courage that it takes to endure that battle and keep it quiet. The human endurance it takes to keep his body physically fit and so forth, and creating this artwork and inspiring others and sharing these stories. And I think about my own age. I am so incredibly grateful for the things that I have, the opportunities that have been given to me, and what I can do in my life. We all have inside of us a greatness that we are destined to explore. We can do that for ourselves. We can help others to achieve that as well. And that is the inspiration that I take from this event. And there is a thread of shame that it takes an event like this to remind me that time is absolutely precious and it must be spent wisely. For me to be reminded that today and the days to come, that I must do the most to honor the time that has been given to me and make the most of it. I hope you can do the same. And being here on this channel and following this education, I hope that it helps you further down that path. And I hope that you find something in the next 3 days in these videos that will help you in your education, your career in art, and will feed your soul a little bit too. Hi folks, welcome back to this complete composite series. We have a special guest today in the Bay. This is my friend Converse Ninja. You can see all of his work on Instagram by following his link below on the screen. So, this photography shoot that we're going to do today is what I call a postcard composite, and it's where we do not see their feet. So it makes it much easier to ultimately make a composite. And most movie posters and so forth tend to fall into this realm, where 75–80% of the characters on the poster, you do not see their feet. It's some kind of nice, heavily graphicked image. And why is that important? Well, because then all the elements in the background, all the stock that you would put into it, the perspectives don't necessarily have to match. You can have a stock scene of a city on fire or Wakanda on fire and Black Panther's walking forward, and the angle of the city does not have to match the photography angle of the subject. And of course, then again, you can put other characters into the scene if you want to and build a typical movie poster. The one key thing that you have to do if you're doing a postcard composite and you're setting up for it is to make sure that the lighting itself matches from scene to scene, or from character to character. In this case, this one postcard composite we're going to do today is just going to involve Black Panther. So if we were building that movie poster with other characters and we had those cosplayers on set, I would make sure that this lighting pattern, whatever I chose, would be the same for every single person. So in this case today, we're going to be using one light, which is our Godox 8600. It's using a 47-inch octabox with 2 panels of diffusion, so that it's a very soft light. It's also set up in a butterfly lighting pattern, where essentially it is top down at a 45-degree angle to our subject. So we'll cast a lot of great shadow into the costume. Now, one of the reasons why I was excited to work with you all, and this is true, is because I knew you would bring Black Panther to the scene. And Black Panther is a lot of fun to photograph because most of it is black. And it is wonderful to create shadows with. It's wonderful to create lighting patterns with. When you light something that is pure white, it can be difficult because the white costumes and fabrics and so forth can absorb a lot of light. When you're shooting against a pure black costume, it can absorb a lot of light. But the material in his costume is not it's reflective. It's not going to absorb a lot of the light. So it should speculatively bounce off and come back at us. But the other signature color in the costume is silver. So it creates these beautiful specular highlights in all the shots. And then the helmet, the mask itself, has a material that is reflective as well. So the light's going to bounce off of it even further. So I know from a perspective, or from a focus-driven idea of what I want the audience to see, when the light hits the mask, it's going to bounce off the most specular highlights, and then it will cascade down. So therefore, from a focus perspective, I want the audience to connect with his eyes and then to look down the rest of the scene itself. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that he's metered up. Again, as I've said in many other videos, if you don't use a light meter, that's okay, but don't trust your LCD and your camera because it's not going to give you an accurate representation of light. Once you can get to it, get yourself a light meter, it will change your life. I'm using the Sekonic light meter. I'm going to extend the diode, and I'm going to come into the scene, and I'm going to put it right at the base of his chin so that his chin and nose will be the closest thing to camera, and I'm going to point the diode up toward the main light and fire the light. We're at f11.4. I want to shoot today at f11, ISO 400, and 1/160th of a second. So I just need to bring the light down in power by 1/3 of a stop, and now remeter, and I'm at f11 on the money exactly. So the lighting looks good. The next thing that I need to do is I need to introduce the color picker into the scene. This is a color checker. I need to stop saying color picker. Color picker is in Photoshop. Color checker by X-Rite. So this device essentially gives me a play of white through gray and black, and then multiple colors that I can use to color balance the image if needs be. And it also at the back has a gray card and white so that I can essentially balance the scene based upon luminosity values if needs be. So what I'm going to have you do is hold this up and put this right by your chin for me, and then get a shot of it. Let me make sure my camera is set to where I need it to be. Okay, hold it right there for me. Good, and now let me go ahead and switch it for you. Thank you. And hold that for me. Okay. And here we go. Good. Now I have an accurate reading of white, black, and gray, multiple colors in this light. So I can shoot at auto white balance in the camera. I don't have to shoot a custom Kelvin, and I can make sure later I can color correct the scene as needs be. Is that important with a costume that's predominantly black? It absolutely is, because this costume is not true black. It's not 000 across the board for RGB. There are different color tones in this that make it black, most probably reds that are in the tones. So you need to be able to balance this, because as you move the lights around in this scene, you need to reference back to those colors to be able to get everything where we need it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and shoot a test shot just to make sure the lighting pattern is good. So go ahead and move just a little bit for me this way. Okay, perfect. Come back just a tad right there. Okay, good. And take the tiniest step toward me. Right there. Good. Now I know from an even play, this light should be at a good 45-degree angle, cascading down, hitting the mask, and then falling off into shadow. This is a test. Lighting looks good. Now it's time to step into the character and start working with the talent on set. So obviously, Converse Ninja knows his character, and he knows he probably intimately knows Black Panther, right? Because you've chosen to cosplay this.
This is my character.
Good. So then at this point, I always want to, on set, even though my intent is to do a postcard composite, I always want to shoot a few extra poses just in case. Because working with them in this time and energy, I know the one poster, or the one composite that I'm after, but if I can get them involved a little bit more in a different pose, that's always key to do. So let's start with Wakanda Forever, just as the easy one. And this is probably one of your go-to poses anytime you're at a con and somebody says, "Can I take your picture?" Right?
That right here, Wakanda Forever.
Right, right. And this is what the audience expects, and so they love playing this part of it. But then from here, is there something else we can shoot? And that's what we're going to explore in just a moment. Okay, good. So keep this there. Bring your left shoulder down ever so slightly. Good. Chin up. And push your chin out. There. Chin up. Good. Okay, and now I'm looking at the rest of the costume, the positions of his arms, to make sure all the elements of the costume are seen, they're not being covered up, and that everything is playing out at a good angle so that everything is tilted up just a little bit toward the light. Good. Hold right there for me. And here we go. Okay, you can relax. So in this postcard composite, This one pose, Wakanda Forever, it's a very simple pose, but it's actually complex because you need to worry about symmetry. You have to make sure that everything in the scene is symmetrical, because that extra little bit of effort visually is going to make an even stronger image. If one shoulder is higher than the other, if one wrist is higher than the other, if his chin is turned a little bit the wrong way, it isn't the symmetry of what you would expect from that classic pose of Wakanda Forever. So we want to make sure that we get that in the most linear symmetry that we can in the image itself. Now that we've captured that, I want to do Wakanda Forever again, but I want you to turn and face this. Hi folks, welcome back to this Black Panther movie poster series. As you've seen in the first video, we went through the photography aspects and showing you how to capture those images and some of the key elements that you need to pay attention to in photography to be able to get some great images to take into Photoshop. When you're able to pursue your artwork from a personal passion, that's always the best place to start from in any kind of work. And it's not absolutely necessary in compositing, and especially when it comes to cosplay. There are many different times that I have created cosplay composites for characters that I don't even know who they are. I've never seen the show or the movie or read the comic and so forth. And what's enjoyable about that is because I get to talk to the cosplayer, and the cosplayer will share with me their interests and their passions, and you can pick up key elements in those conversations that really can drive that forward. But when you're able to come at a project like this Black Panther movie poster and share your interests and passion with the cosplayer and why it's so important, you both meet on a level of art and human connection that is so absolutely vital in the work that you can do, because you're able to understand their passions and communicate yours, and that can certainly influence the images that you capture and the artwork choices that you make. But furthermore, from a business perspective, you're able to have that person, that cosplayer, champion you and that work because they know why it's so important to you and they know your connection to it. And when they're able to know that part of you and that side of you, it helps them be able to push your business out there to potentially acquire new work. So I shared my knowledge with Converse Ninja and my reasons for wanting to do Black Panther when we did the shoot. And it is something that I'm glad I did, because we both were able to communicate the deep connections we have to the story of King T'Challa, who is Black Panther, and the stories that he comes from. Black Panther came out in February of 2018, and I actually did not see the movie when it came out in theaters for a good but sad reason. I actually did see the film, but I saw it in July or August of 2018, whenever it was released to DVD. I didn't see it in the movie theaters because in February of 2018, my father, a few months before that, had been diagnosed with cancer. And he was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma, and he had a good chance of surviving. But in February 2018, at that point, he had been through a lot of chemotherapy, and it was evident that he was losing his battle with cancer. And so actually, when the movie came out, I had to fly back and forth to his home state from mine and was visiting him in the hospital and with my family. And we were making decisions because we were preparing ourselves for the fact that the end of his life was coming. And he passed away in May 30 of 2018, and he lived a wonderfully long life, and he died quickly, which is something that when people who are suffering from cancer, it's something that you learn to be grateful for a quick release, because it can be a long and very painful process. So he is desperately missed by me and my family, and he was such a wonderful, wonderful man. When I saw the film of Black Panther, I don't know much about the story, and I don't know much about what to expect in the film. And if you haven't seen the film, I apologize. There's going to be a few spoilers here. So if you don't want to be spoiled and go see the film that's been out for a few years now, then I highly recommend don't watch this intro and just go on, and hopefully I don't leak any other spoilers. Go watch the movie. It's a fantastic movie. I knew nothing about Black Panther, and when I step into it and see the film, essentially the main character, King T'Challa, he becomes king because his father dies. His father dies in a previous Marvel film. I believe it was an Iron Man, Captain America film, Civil War. He dies in that film. So T'Challa has to come and take over the legacy and step into the role of being Black Panther and taking over as king of Wakanda, which is where they live. There's a scene in the film where T'Challa visits the ancestral plane, where he is able to see his father and communicate with him. And he essentially, in that opening, seeing his father, who is a panther in a tree. And there are other panthers roaming around this tree, and it's got a very visual, wonderful style that we'll discuss here in a few moments. But his father's a panther and steps down from the tree, and then morphs into being the human being that we saw, and they have this wonderful conversation where T'Challa essentially tells him that he's not ready. And his father, of course, tries to tell him, well, of course you're ready to be king. And he says, no, I'm not ready to live life without you. And his father says this wonderful line where he says that all fathers, if they have not prepared their children to live after their death, then they have failed as fathers. And that ultimately fathers, their goal is to lead a good life, of course, by example, but then ultimately to be able to prepare their children to live without them. And that is something that obviously was very poignant to me at the time that I saw it. And because of that element, and because of the element of losing my father, this emotional connection to this character, the film up until that point was already incredible. And I was like, wow, this is a really good story. I love this. And I love the cinematic, the story, the characters, the acting. It's all wonderful. And then that scene hit, and I thought, my God, this is and has been my favorite Marvel film is Black Panther. My second favorite is Infinity War. Anyway, so the story of this character I can get behind. I can get with him and connect to it. And what I find so fascinating is that, yes, these are characters, African Americans. And the actors playing them, African Americans. It's a film filled with African Americans and one token white guy. And I loved that, because ultimately we needed more diversity in Hollywood in these films and so forth. And so what I was able to do when I'm having my conversation with Converse Ninja and we're talking about the impact of this character, what he found fascinating was that here's a white guy who says, I love this character, and my gosh, I would want to cosplay this character because his story and so forth. So here's a white person who is wanting to cosplay an African American character. In many ways that African American cosplayers want to cosplay Superman, but Superman has traditionally been a white male character. So having this conversation and connection, I was able to share the intimacy with Converse Ninja, so that when he does the pose of Wakanda Forever and the arms are across the chest, he's done that pose a bazillion times. And it's no different of a standard pose than Superman standing there with his hands on his hips. But when we did our shoot, he knew what I was connected to. He knew that emotional connection. And it made that simple pose that he's done 1,000 times special. Not only because of my connection and the intent, but because his love and connection to Black Panther was reinvigorated because of mine. And when I made this artwork, that artwork, it is beautiful, but it is ultimately special because of our connection and our conversation about this character, and we bonded over it. So it is absolutely vital that if you are connected and have a special interest in these characters or the artwork that you're creating, share that with your client, share that with your subject in front of your camera. It's not absolutely important that you must have some deep connection like this to be able to do the work, but I've gotten the question so many times when I teach, people asking, ultimately, how do you step into this as far as what you choose to do, to photograph in the art that you choose to create? And I consistently draw from things that have deep emotional connection to me. Things that make me laugh, things that make me cry, things that make me afraid, things that make me feel tremendous amounts of courage and justice and discipline. And these are the stories and emotions and feelings that become my foundation of artwork. And I communicate that to my clients to make these special moments. So that's my connection to this movie poster. That's my connection to this character. And essentially this movie poster is going to be recreating Wakanda Forever in that pose, but using the ancestral plane as a backdrop, because that scene in the film was incredibly impactful to me. So I'm going to go ahead and show you here. We have the two images inside of Adobe Camera Raw, and this the first one's funny to me because It's Black Panther just standing there with his color card, like, hey, here's a color card. Anyway, I'm sorry. I just find that funny. So anyway, this was the image that we took with Black Panther holding the color card. And why is this important? Because we do need, I discussed this in the photography video, but it is important to get a color card shot in the actual lighting and the ambient light of the space so that you can white balance the image. And even though his costume is predominantly black, there's going to be subtle shifts of color. And it's just a good practice always to get a good white balance on your images when you can. If you don't have a color card, you can use a white piece of paper. Just make sure that they're holding it up in the lighting that you're actually using so that you can get an accurate reading on it. So what we're going to be doing is in the film strip, you have this top image here, which is Black Panther holding the color card, but this is the image that we're going to be actually working on. So what I want to do is in this card, I'm going to do a white balance check on this card, which will change a couple of values. And then I'm going to sync that to this image here, the bottom one that we actually want to work on. And then I'm going to ignore this top image and start working, making changes specifically to just this photo itself. So before I do the white balance check, I want to point out a couple things. First, the temperature of this image right now is set to 6300, and then the tint is set to +10, which is shifting it over into the magenta realm. So when I choose the white balance tool, and then I'm going to click, I'm not going to do it yet, but when I click on this white square at the bottom, it should shift these two numbers subtly. So I'm going to go ahead and click it now. And now we've went from 6300 to 5750, and then we've actually went up by 1 point in the tint toward magenta. And now based upon that white point in the image, in the lighting that's in the space, we should have an accurate white balance to the image. It is such a minor shift. It's getting us a little away from it being a warmer image into a little bit of a cooler image. But ultimately, like I said, it's a good practice to do in any type of compositing work or any kind of photography work if you have a color card. If not, use a white piece of paper and white balance your images. So now that we've done that, what I need to do is I'm going to go ahead and hold Shift and then click the bottom image so it is active. And while this is my top active selected image, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and hit the S key, S for stamp. And what is going, or synchronize, S for synchronize, is going to bring up the synchronize window. And then I have the option through here to check anything that I want to be synchronized to all the images that I have selected. In this case, I have made no other changes whatsoever to the image except for white balance here. So I can go ahead and leave them checked. And then when I hit OK, it will now alter this image to drop it down to those same numbers for white balance. So I now know that the image that I want to work on is white balance and I can proceed forward. So the first thing that I want to do in the Camera Raw adjustments, and just a little side note, if you have not seen the previous videos where we talk about working in Adobe Camera Raw and so forth on the basic Photoshop video, then you can feel free to check those out before you step into this one. If you're very familiar with all of this, then hopefully it'll just be a quick refresher. So I'm going to go in, my first tab is to lens corrections. I'm going to check both remove chromatic aberrations and enable profile corrections. This will then tell the computer built into the profile what my lens was and overcoming the issues of distortion and vignetting in the image. Now I'm going to come back to the main tab and begin looking at the image and what I need to do. And where do I start? I start from the foundation of color, luminosity, and detail. And the first thing that I see in the image that I want to think about and work on is luminosity. So I don't necessarily want to hit the exposure slider to make everything brighter. What I want to do is start trying to take away some of the black point that's in the image so that we can get a little bit more detail into this image itself. However, I don't want to completely remove all the shadows. I don't want to completely remove all the black point. My goal, as I've said in the previous videos, is to make the image as neutral as possible, but I don't necessarily want to make it so neutral that the lighting pattern choice itself is now moot. I don't want to change that to the point that it's no longer valid. I chose a butterfly lighting pattern because I wanted those shadows to sculpt underneath the jawline, underneath the arms, and so forth. But I just need to lift those shadows a little bit to get some of that detail. So I'm going to go ahead and take the shadow slider first and pull it out a little bit. I'm looking at the image in the places that are the darkest and just seeing how it affects, and I'm going to pull it out just a little bit right there. I know that as I work with other sliders, I may return to the shadow slider and either introduce shadow back into the image or take it out even further. But in this case, I now want to come down to the black point in the image and let the black point be reevaluated based upon a new level. So right about there, I think looks pretty good. Again, we still have all those wonderful shadows preserved, but by pulling these two sliders out, we're getting more detail in those areas that we can work with in our final image. I'm going to go ahead and increase the white point just a little bit, just to see if it's going to give us some more bounce in certain areas of highlights, and it is. And it's giving us a nice base pattern to potentially look at for dodging and burning. So in the specular highlights that we can see through here in the mask itself, by pulling the white slider forward, let's take it back to where it was to 0. By pulling the white slider forward, we're starting to get some really cool, nice detail into this part of the image. Is this going to affect when I start bringing in the stock elements into the image? Again, I said I want to make it neutral. It shouldn't, because this is a very stylized image, what I have created. It's going to be very colorful and stylized, and at this point there is going to be a lot of crisp highlights and a lot of deep shadow. So at that point, I know I'm pretty safe here where I'm at by increasing that white point and giving us just a little bit more dimension in the image itself. I can, of course, take the highlights up if I want to, but the highlights aren't something that I necessarily want to push too hard, because they're going to start going too far right here at the center of his mask, at the top of his forehead. So I don't necessarily need to take the highlights up really that much at all. So, okay, at this point, I've looked at the luminosity perspective. I'm going to go ahead and look at color. Even though the costume is predominantly black, it's made up of a lot of different colors, blues, reds, yellows, RGB values. So those are in the image right now. And so all I want to do is think about my final output in the image. And my final output in the image is going to involve a lot of purple and a lot of orange, because the spec images that I will show you in a video that's coming up when we talk about how we're going to build that world for the composite, I'm going to show you different screen captures from the actual movie. And you're going to see the color palette that's there. That was the inspiration for the color choices I'm going to make. So in this case, I know that because I want a lot of purple and a lot of orange into the image, and it's going to infuse into this picture of Black Panther, I don't necessarily need to work with increasing any colors here. If I take vibrance up a little bit, is it going to make the base vibrance of some of these colors that are there a little bit stronger? For sure, but it's not really a necessary step, because again, we're going to be infusing a lot of color into the composite, utilizing some techniques of blend if and so forth, color dodge that we had talked about in the previous videos. So luminosity has been taken care of, color has been taken care of, essentially because, again, this is a simple one. The costume's made predominantly black. So the last thing to do is to look at texture and detail and make sure that we're good to go in there. I did not mean to click that. I was still on the white balance tool. I meant to be on the hand tool. So we were 5750, I believe, for the yellow point, and then 14, I think, for the magenta. So we're good there. I'm going to make sure I'm on the hand tool and not the white balance tool, so I can move the image around if needs be. Or let's go to the zoom tool. So let's zoom in and just make sure that, again, primary focus point is going to be his face, that it's got some good textures to it. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the texture slider a little bit. That's usually my first thing that I want to go to, just to get some enhanced texture in the overall image. Then I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit of a bump of clarity. I'm not a fan of clarity, heavy-handed clarity, because it's too HDR in my perspective, from my perspective. And then the sharpening, we're pretty good there. I will leave final sharpening and final detail enhancement to the artistic steps that we would do. But on a baseline, to look at this and make sure that we're good to go, I can just give this just a bent, a little touch of texture. I'm actually going to slide it down just a tad, because again, I don't want to go too far, because the final artistic enhancements will increase texture and sharpening across the entire image, which means the stock images and so forth will be sharpened at the same time as Black Panther is, and further unifying them together. So I'm going to hit Control or Command and 0 to zoom all the way back out. I don't need to visit the hue, saturation, luminance tabs, because again, there's nothing really in there from a color perspective that needs to be worked on. I've done the lens corrections to make sure that I've overcome distortions and vignetting, and then I've looked at it from a luminosity perspective to ultimately just lift some of those shadows in the black point to get us ready to take it into Photoshop. And at this point, I think we look good. I think we've processed everything from that foundation of color, luminosity, and detail, and everything looks ready to go. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and say open image, and it's going to open it into Photoshop itself. Once we get into Photoshop, I'm going to show you some of the other stock images, and then we'll get into doing dodging and burning and quick selection and extracting our subject. So we're going to be utilizing these pieces of stock photos that I have purchased either from Adobe stock, or ultimately this was purchased from a company called Dollar Photo Club, which no longer exists. Adobe bought them out and then raised the price by 300%. Anyway, so we're going to be using these different pieces of stock and blending them together to make a wonderful movie poster composite. And this is a moment where I want to stress something here. We are talking, I know compositing can be a very difficult thing to grasp. And you can see composites that have hundreds of layers and several hours of creation. We're using 4 pieces of stock that are going to hold hands with blending modes inside of Photoshop and our picture. And realistically, when we look at the final composite document, the living document, you're going to see that this isn't many layers at all. And this is one of my favorite things about composites, is because this picture in this final artwork is going to be having impact and driven by the artistry, of course, but also by the connection and the story that we're trying to communicate and take from this character. So I'm excited to get into this. So this is the end of this video, and go ahead and step into the next one where we'll do some dodging and burning on our character of Black Panther.